The scent of burnt coffee and old oil hung in the air, a perfume I'd known for 30 years. I was just torquing the last lug nut on Mrs. Gable's old Ford Taurus when he walked in. Kyle. He didn't walk like he belonged in a garage. He glided, his shiny loafers somehow avoiding every grease spot on the concrete floor. He was holding a tablet, the bright screen clashing with the dusty calendars on the wall. He stopped and looked at the car, then at me. A little smirk played on his lips. "Frank, still using that old torque wrench? We have digital ones now. They're faster, more efficient." I wiped my hands on a rag, the grease sinking into the worn fabric. "This one's never failed me, Kyle. It's accurate. That's what matters." He chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Right, the old ways. That's what your generation always says." He gestured vaguely toward my toolbox, the one I had inherited from my own mentor. "Look, I'm just trying to bring this place into the 21st century. Your loyalty is, admirable, but nostalgia doesn't pay the bills." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was supposed to seem friendly, but felt like he was checking for dust. He thought he was just making a point. He didn't know I had spent the last 3 nights building the Ghost, a very wealthy, very interested ghost who was about to show Kyle what old-fashioned loyalty and a good memory were really worth.
For 35 years, Davis Auto wasn't just my job, it was my life. I started here sweeping floors when I was barely out of high school. Old man Davis, God rest his soul, took me under his wing. He wasn't just a boss. He was the one who taught me the difference between fixing a car and caring for it. "A man's truck, Frank," he'd say, his voice raspy from years of unfiltered cigarettes. "It's his partner. You treat it with respect." He taught me how to listen to an engine, to feel misfire through the soles of my boots. He gave me a trade, a purpose, and a sense of pride that came from honest, hard work. When he passed away 2 years ago, it felt like a foundational beam had been kicked out from under the town. The shop went to his only living relative, his nephew, Kyle. We'd never met him. Heard he was some kind of marketing hotshot in Chicago. He showed up a month after the funeral in a brand new BMW that looked like it would get a panic attack if it saw a gravel road. He was all smiles and handshakes at first, talked a big game about honoring his uncle's legacy, while his eyes scanned the place like he was calculating how much the scrap metal was worth. He was in his mid-30s, with a haircut that cost more than my monthly mortgage, and a vocabulary full of words like synergy, optimization, and leveraging assets. To him, Davis's Auto wasn't a local institution. It was an underperforming asset. The first thing to go was the old percolator, replaced by some fancy pod machine that made coffee that tasted like hot plastic. Then came the new uniforms, cheap polyester things that made you sweat in July and freeze in January. He replaced our trusted American-made parts suppliers with cheaper overseas outfits, said it was good for the bottom line. I told him it was bad for the cars. He just smiled, that slick, empty smile of his. The worst part, though, was watching what he was doing to Leo. Leo was our apprentice, a good kid, maybe 20 years old. He reminded me of myself back in the day, eager, a little naive, but with good hands and a genuine desire to learn. I was teaching him the way Davis taught me, how to rebuild the carburetor instead of just replacing it, how to diagnose a problem with your ears and nose before ever plugging in a computer. I saw the future of the craft in that kid. Kyle saw him as a blank slate. He started taking Leo aside, filling his head with nonsense about how my methods were obsolete, how the real money was in quick turnover, upselling customers on services they didn't need. He was turning a potential craftsman into a parts swapper. He was teaching him to value the invoice more than the work itself, and that, more than anything, felt like a betrayal of everything Old Man Davis had built. The tension in the shop went from a low hum to a high-pitched whine over the next few months. Kyle's business model was simple: charge more, do less. He'd walk by while I was meticulously cleaning a part and say, "Time is money, Frank, just put a new one in." He didn't understand that for customers like Maria, who ran the diner down the street, every dollar mattered. She couldn't afford a brand new fuel pump for her delivery van every time a filter got clogged. One Tuesday, her van was towed in, sputtering and stalling. I knew that vehicle like the back of my hand. It was a fuel line issue, probably clogged. An hour of work, a $50 part, tops. I told Maria I'd have it running by lunch. Kyle overheard. He pulled me into the office. 150 franc at least. For what? It's a clogged line, I said, trying to keep my voice even. It's an intermittent fuel delivery system failure. Sounds more expensive, doesn't it? We'll replace the whole line and the filter, and let's recommend a full injector cleaning. Bill her for 4 hours. She'll pay it. She needs the van. I just stared at him. Mr. Davis never did business that way. Kyle leaned back in the new leather chair that still had the price tag hidden underneath, and Mr. Davis died barely breaking even. This is a business, not a charity. I did the repair my way. Cleaned the line, replaced the filter, and charged her for an hour and a half of labor, just to keep Kyle off my back. She was grateful, paid in cash, and left a box of donuts for the crew. When Kyle saw the invoice, he didn't say a word. He just gave me a look that could curdle milk. The next day, he started his real campaign. He began pointing out mistakes in my work to Leo. A bolt I hadn't torqued to his new specifications. A diagnostic he claimed I'd missed. He'd wait until I was on my lunch break and then walk Leo over to a car I'd finished, whispering and pointing. I could see the doubt creeping into Leo's eyes. The kid started second-guessing me, asking why we weren't just following the flow chart on Kyle's new diagnostic tablet. The final straw came with Mr. Henderson's classic Chevy, a '68 C10, cherry red. He'd been bringing it to Davis's since it was new. The transmission was slipping, a common problem with that model. It was a nuanced fix, requiring patience. Kyle wanted to just swap in a cheap rebuilt unit he found online. Guaranteed for 6 months, he chirped. I refused. That transmission is original to the truck. It needs to be rebuilt properly with the right parts. It's about preserving the vehicle, not just getting it back on the road. We argued, right there on the shop floor. In the end, I told him I'd do it on my own time if I had to. He laughed. "Fine, old man, have it your way. Waste your weekend." Then he turned to Leo. "See, Leo, this is what I'm talking about. Emotional attachment to metal. It's bad for business." I rebuilt that transmission over the weekend. It ran smoother than it had in 20 years. But when Mr. Henderson came to pick it up, Kyle presented him with a bill that included a line item for sourcing vintage components for $300. It was a lie. I had the parts already, from a supplier Davis had used for decades. I'd had enough of watching him tarnish a good name. My name, Davis's name. I had to do something, but fighting him head-on was like wrestling a pig in mud. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it. I needed a different kind of tool. Not a wrench, but a lever.
The idea came to me on a Thursday night. I was sitting in my garage, nursing a cold beer and looking at my own project, a half-restored 1970 Chevelle. It was my escape. My hands were stained with grease, my mind quiet for the first time all day. I was thinking about Kyle, about his obsession with image and easy money. He didn't respect the work, but he worshipped success. He was always talking about scaling up,
finding angel investors, and turning Davis's into a regional franchise. It was all cheap talk, but it was the language he understood. That's when I overheard my daughter Sarah on the phone in the kitchen. She was home from college for the weekend, studying for a marketing final. She was talking to a friend. No, it's so easy. You just create a professional-looking profile on LinkedIn, build a fake company website with one of those template services, get a dedicated email address. You can make anyone look like a Fortune 500 executive in an afternoon. It's all about perception. A switch flipped in my head. Perception. Kyle wasn't a mechanic, he was a salesman. And what does a salesman chase? A big sale. I walked into the kitchen. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Hey, Dad, everything okay?" I said, "Tell me more about that." I nodded toward her laptop. "This fake executive thing." She explained it to me, how you could build a convincing online identity for next to nothing, a digital ghost. The more she talked, the clearer the plan became. I wasn't going to fight Kyle on my turf. I was going to lure him onto his, into a world of smoke and mirrors where he felt comfortable, a world I could build and control. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at our old desktop computer, the one we usually just used for paying bills, and I started sketching out a character. He needed a name that sounded old, respectable, and rich. Richard Sterling. I liked the sound of that. The Sterling Standard. It had a ring of quality. I decided Richard Sterling was a semi-retired investment consultant from the East Coast, specializing in small-cap legacy businesses. He was looking for a passion project, a company with good bones that he could help grow. He was discreet, professional, and most importantly, he had deep pockets. The next day, I asked Sarah for help. I told her I was exploring an idea. She was intrigued. Together, we spent the weekend bringing Richard Sterling to life. She set up a crisp, professional LinkedIn profile with a stock photo of a distinguished-looking man in his late 60s. She created a simple but elegant landing page for Sterling Capital Investments. We bought the domain name for $12. I wrote the copy myself, filling it with all the buzzwords Kyle loved: strategic growth, market penetration, brand actualization. It felt ridiculous, but I knew it was the perfect bait. Finally, we created a new email address, r.sterlinginvestments@gmail.com. Simple, clean, untraceable. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the rat to smell the cheese. I made my first move the following Monday. From a public computer at the library, I sent the first email. As Richard Sterling, I wrote a short, formal message to the main address for Davis's Auto. Subject: Inquiry regarding potential investment. Mr. Morrison, my firm has been conducting a preliminary survey of established service businesses in your region, and Davis's Auto has been flagged as a company with significant growth potential. I specialize in providing capital and strategic guidance to legacy businesses poised for modernization. If this is something that might be of interest to you, I would be open to a preliminary, confidential discussion. Sincerely, Richard Sterling, Sterling Capital Investments. I closed the browser, cleared the history, and walked out. The waiting was the hardest part. I went to work the next day, acting as if nothing had happened. I kept my head down, did my job, and ignored Kyle's passive-aggressive comments. It took less than 24 hours. On Tuesday afternoon, I saw Kyle glued to his office computer, a wide, hungry grin on his face. He was typing furiously. A few minutes later, he walked out onto the shop floor, practically strutting. He looked at me and Leo and announced, "Just so you both know, we might be seeing some big changes around here. I've got some serious interest from a major investor. Things are about to get a lot bigger. He was practically preening. That night, I went back to the library. The reply was in Richard Sterling's inbox. It was long, fawning, and desperate. Kyle had swallowed the hook, the line, and the sinker. Over the next 2 weeks, I played him. I became Richard Sterling. I'd go to the library every other night and engage in a slow, methodical email exchange. I was patient. I asked probing questions about his business plan, his vision, his management style. And Kyle, eager to impress this non-existent millionaire, told me everything. He laid out his entire cynical strategy. He emailed me spreadsheets detailing how much money he could save by firing me and the other senior mechanic and hiring 3 kids for the price of 1 franc. He bragged about his new cheap parts supplier, calling it a profit margin gold mine. He was especially vile when he talked about the people I cared about. In one email, he wrote, "The kid, Leo, is malleable. A little praise, a little talk about a management track, and he'll do whatever I say. He's already starting to see that the old guard's way of doing things is a dead end." In another, complaining about community relations, he wrote, "There's this one customer, a diner owner named Maria. Thinks because she brought my uncle a casserole once a year, she's entitled to a discount. I've been padding her invoices for months. She has no clue. It's like taking candy from a baby." He even sent me a confidential business plan. It was all there. His plan to franchise, his intention to dissolve the Davis's Auto name in favor of some generic brand like Quick Fix Auto, his contempt for the very customers and community that had kept the shop afloat for 50 years. Each email was a nail in his coffin, and I saved every one. I printed them out at the library, creating a thick folder of his own words, his own greed, his own betrayal. The phantom investor he was trying to impress was about to become his judge and jury.
On the final Friday of the month, I came into work with a heavy manila folder under my arm. Kyle was in a great mood, humming to himself as he poured a cup of his awful pod coffee. "Big day, Frank," he said with a wink. "Got a final call with my investor this afternoon. About to close the deal." "Is that so?" I said calmly. "Well, before that, I think we should have a little shop meeting. There's something everyone needs to see." He looked annoyed, but shrugged. "Fine, 5 minutes." He called Leo over from the bay where he was working. I saw Maria's delivery van pull into the lot. I'd called her that morning and told her I'd found an issue with her last invoice and that she should stop by. She walked in, looking concerned. "What's this about, Frank?" she asked. We all gathered in the small, cluttered office. Kyle leaned against his desk, arms crossed and patient. "Okay, Frank, what's so important?" I didn't say a word. I just opened the folder and took out the first stack of printed emails. I handed a set to Leo. I handed a set to Maria, and I placed the last set on the desk in front of Kyle. He glanced at the top page. It was his first email to Richard Sterling. His face went from smug to confused, then to pale, stark white. Leo's eyes widened as he read Kyle's words about him being malleable. He looked up from the page, his face flushed with shame and anger. He looked at me and I could see the apology in his eyes before he even said it. Maria let out a small gasp as she read the part about her padded invoices. She held the papers in her hand like they were something foul. She looked at Kyle, her expression a mixture of disbelief and pure contempt. "You've been stealing from me," she said, her voice quiet but shaking with fury. Kyle just stared at the papers, then at me. The color had completely drained from his face. "What is this? Where did you get this?" "I sent them to you," I said, my voice steady. Or, well, you sent them to Richard Sterling, the investor. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back a step, looking from the papers to my face. The slick, confident hotshot was gone. In his place was just a cornered, pathetic man, exposed by his own ambition. "I think I've seen enough," Maria said, her voice now cold as steel. "I'll be taking my business elsewhere, and I'll be sure to let everyone in town know exactly what kind of man you are." She turned and walked out without a backward glance. Leo dropped the papers on the desk. I can't work here," he stammered, looking at me. "Frank, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have listened." "It's all right, son. He's a convincing liar." I took off my greasy work shirt, the one with Frank stitched over the pocket, and folded it neatly. I placed it on the desk next to the pile of emails. "I quit, Kyle. This place used to stand for something. My guess is it won't for much longer." I walked out of that office and didn't look back. The smell of oil and coffee was already being replaced by the stink of deceit. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again.
I spent that weekend in my garage, where I belonged. The solid, cool steel of my Chevelle felt good in my hands. There was no synergy here, no leveraging assets. Just me, my tools, and a problem I could solve with patience and skill. There's a truth in that kind of work. You can't lie to an engine block. You can't sweet talk a faulty bearing. It either works or it doesn't. It's honest. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like I'd won some great victory. I just felt quiet. The whole thing with Kyle wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. Not the kind you find in a courtroom, but the simple, everyday kind. It was about defending a good man's name, Mr. Davis's. It was about protecting a good kid like Leo from a bad influence and protecting a good neighbor like Maria from a cheat. Leo called me on Sunday, apologized again. He told me Kyle had been calling him nonstop, trying to smooth things over, but he wasn't buying it. He asked me what I was going to do next. I told him I wasn't sure. Maybe just finish the Cheval. He hesitated, then said, "Well, if you ever decide to, open up your own place, I'd be proud to work for you, to learn the right way." I smiled. Maybe that was the real victory. Knowing the craft, the real craft, would live on. I heard through the grapevine that Kyle is struggling. 2 other longtime customers pulled their accounts after talking to Maria. You can't find good help. You can build a business on lies, but it's a foundation of sand. Sooner or later, the tide comes in. He didn't need me to ruin him. He just needed a mirror. And I guess in a way, that's all Richard Sterling ever was. A mirror reflecting his own ugly soul right back at him.